Welcome to Module 8, Week 8, the last week of the course. The title for today's course is Sustaining Improvement Within the Facility Organization. We'll be discussing how you, as a facility manager, can take actions that will sustain the excellence and improvements you have initiated or implemented within your organization. The learning objectives for Module 8, Week 8, of FM 5413 Leadership and Strategy are to describe and explain facility management organizational excellence. This is particularly how to sustain that excellence and continuously improve your performance. Number 2 is to formulate a focus on excellence and driving, and I would say and sustaining, positive performance. Number 3 is formulate organizational business process improvement strategies that will result in sustaining excellence and continuously improving performance. These are tied back into the learning objectives you've been taking from previous classes, but I wanted to make sure that you understand how they relate to those. According to Stormy Friday, which by the way is the greatest name ever for a facility manager, and David Kotz in Quality Facility Management 1995, there are 5 pillars or themes that facility managers should be governed by. The first is quality services start with the customer service. As Christopher Ahoy said in his book, which is one of our texts, Customer Driven Operations Management, quote, world-class organizations are customer-focused, and that includes satisfaction, delight, and success. They're customer-focused on doing the right things rather than on doing things right. Of course, you want to be doing the right things right? Later in this lecture, you'll see that it is the customer and the customer alone who determines quality. The second pillar is you must be committed to continually improve, which is what this entire class today is about. It means you focus on process rather than the individual, and you recognize that both internal and external customers are important, and it promotes the need for objective data to analyze and improve processes. Number 3 is you must be willing and able to measure and be measured, but measure what matters to your organization's effectiveness and success. It's got to be something that affects how you perform so that you can then find ways to improve that performance. Number 4 is employees must be empowered, held responsible, and they have to view themselves and their jobs within a broad context of sort of the bigger picture, if you will. You first need to hire the right people and get the right people in the right places on the bus, according to Jim Collins. Number 5 is quality service should be both recognized and marketed inside and outside the company. It's sort of what we've been talking about previously in telling your story. The other thing I would say is another way of marketing that is when you provide excellence, we've talked about how you can put those in newsletters. You have your employees actually wear it on their uniforms, which is what we did with the Excellence Award. The idea is to get that word out so that people understand that you have a quality organization, you have an excellent organization. This is all from Quality Facility Management by Friday and Kotz. You remember a version of this slide from earlier classes. When we talk about sustaining improvement within the facility organization, we're talking about looking deeply at every aspect of facility management and the many functions facility managers are responsible for performing. As I said previously, while some may be more important on any given day, there are quite literally no areas that one can say are more essential than others. They're all essential to your success, and all areas together and separately may make or break your organization. While we touch on sustaining improvement in all areas of facility management, to make it a little easier to focus on the improvement process, I've grayed out those areas that will be covered in more depth in other courses you will take as part of the facility management certificate and ultimately the master's degree program. I've also highlighted in green those functions that we have covered in this course. The remaining areas shown in blue will be the focus of this week's class material, and it all comes down to sustaining your performance, your operations, processes and procedures, measurement and analysis, and then performance results and benchmarking and key performance indicators, and quality assurance. How do you achieve all of that? Because that's how you sustain excellent operation. This is also familiar. I called it in the previous class the Deming cycle, but it really was started by a gentleman named Walter A. Shewhart, who worked with Deming, and Deming was kind of his protege. This was at Bell Laboratories years ago, but he initiated statistical process control charts as well. And it's an excellent way to go through and solve just about any issue that you have. You plan exactly what you're going to do, and you determine when and how you're going to do it. Then you look at what were the results and what do they mean, and then what changes are we going to make based on our findings. I did want to tell you that there is this video that I've found on this that I think makes it very simple to follow, and so if it's only about 6 minutes, but I think it would be very, very helpful to you in seeing how this thing is used. In this course, we've discussed a number of very good assessment techniques to help you to plan exactly what you're going to do. One that was new to me, though, I learned recently from my colleague Glenn Haubold, who was the Associate Vice President at New Mexico State University until he retired last year. It's called an environmental scan, and it's described on the next
module. Will introduce the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle. By the end of this module, learners will be able to define the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, including why and how to use it, define and discuss the key components of the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, discuss scaling down your change ideas using the Drop 2 principle, and finally, share tips on testing multiple change ideas in parallel using Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles for quick and efficient assessment. Once your team has established the aim of your project, determined how you will measure improvements, and identified specific changes you want to make, the next step is to test the changes using the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, or PDSA cycle. The PDSA cycle allows your team to plan how you will test a change, try the change on a small scale, make observations about the results of a change, and then take action based on what was learned by adapting, adopting, or abandoning a change. Basically, the PDSA cycle is the scientific method used to rapidly learn and take action. You can use the components of the PDSA cycle to guide your test. First, plan how the changes will be tested. What do you hope to learn by testing the change? What will happen when you test the change? How will the change be carried out? Be specific about who, what, when, and where. How will you collect data, both qualitative and quantitative data? And again, remember to be specific about who, what, when, and where. Second, try the changes planned on a small scale. Remember to test it with 1 to 2 people for a short amount of time prior to implementing on a larger scale. Make observations and collect data as you try the change, and document any problems as you try the change. Next, take time to study the data collected. Compare the data to the predictions made, reflect on the data and what was learned. And finally, act on what you've learned. Determine whether the change should be adapted, adopted, or abandoned. Make any necessary adaptations to the change. Plan how you will try the change with the new adaptations. Then start over with a new PDSA cycle to test the same change again, but including these new adaptations. Complete this process as many times as possible until you feel the change is ready to implement on a wide scale. Each time you complete a PDSA cycle, you build knowledge, data, and confidence that a change is ready to implement. However, a change does not always achieve the results we expect, so it is important to test on a small scale before wide-scale implementation. This includes the time frame you are testing, as well as the number of people you test with. Remember again to start small. Many times, our initial thought is to test on a large scale. For example, your team has created a new form. Your first response may be to print copies and try it with all clients for the next month. But what if you print 500 copies of the form and later learn the form does not capture the information needed and has spelling errors? One tip to help you try changes on the smallest scale possible is the scaling down or drop to principle. When you have a change and you think, let's test this change for the next month, scale down the change by 2. Let's test this change for a day. Testing on a small scale will also allow your colleagues to try the change and give feedback before it is implemented across the entire organization. This will increase buy-in and help reduce resistance to the change. To increase your confidence that the change will be effective in the future, try it under many conditions. Test with different people, those who are most experienced with the process, and those with the least experience. Test under special situations. For example, different shifts, units, seasons, etc. Test when someone says, it won't work because, and this will give you additional opportunities to test the change and can help narrow down multiple situations in which to test. Most often, multiple changes are needed to change an entire system or process. This will require your team to try multiple changes at the same time. For example, if your team is working to improve the efficiency of a process, you could potentially test 3 to 5 changes at the same time, such as resequencing of the order of process steps, reallocating appointment times, scripting reminder calls to clients, etc. Testing in parallel allows you to test, learn, and adapt changes in rapid fashion, leading to rapid improvement. Now let's try it. Think about a change you want to make, either in your personal life or at work. How can you use the PDSA cycle to try the change on a small scale? Think about the following questions. What will you test? What do you hope to learn from trying the change? How can you apply the drop to principle? And how can you try the change on the smallest scale possible? I encourage you to use the provided link below to check out the Quality Improvement Step-by-Step Guide for links to the PDSA template worksheets and example. Thanks for listening in and happy testing.
Every part of
slide. Before you can begin planning for improvement, you must understand what the current state of your organization is, and you can use an environmental scan to help you understand this. The environmental scan is a tool used to determine the current state of the organization. Once the current organizational condition is known, planning may then take place to attain the desired state, and hopefully that desired state is excellence. An environmental scan begins with obtaining individual and group responses to the following questions. 1, what does your group do well? Number 2 is, what could your group do better? Number 3 is, what do your customers think of facilities in your work group? 4, do you have everything you need to do the job? And you remember that I mentioned that what I used to tell my staff was, the only reason I'm here is to get you what you need to do your job. And then finally, if you don't have everything you need, what else do you need so that you can do your job and do it well? Another tool that I'm sure you've heard of previously, but it's one that's important to understand, and that's SWOT analysis. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you do that analysis to really look at your organization. It's very much like an environmental scan, but it's focused on those things that are positive and negative about your organization or that may affect your organization. Next 5 steps to me are how you sort of handle a SWOT analysis. You get first a diverse group of leaders and staff, and you need to remember to have diverse thinkers as well as people from diverse backgrounds. But they will conduct a review of your organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's basically, on the second one there, it's performed as a brainstorming activity where everyone has an opportunity to provide input without judgment. There are no bad ideas. You can do the analysis of that later, which is number 3, using a scoring mechanism. I've been in various sessions where in some cases they give each person 3 dots and you're supposed to tell what are the 3 most significant strengths or what are the 3 most significant weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Or you can use sticky pads to put up those things that you feel are strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, or threats, and those that occur the most become the ones that win. So when I say win, those would be the ones that come out of the session as the primary strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Then you develop a plan to take advantage of the strengths and opportunities and to mitigate the weaknesses and the threats. You want to live on your strengths, or you want to support your strengths, much like a pro football team would do. If you've got a great passer like Tom Brady or Drew Brees, you're going to want to make sure that you take advantage of that. If you've got a running game that's strong, you want to take advantage of that. So you lead with your strengths, and you try to mitigate really your weaknesses and also threats, any threats that you may see. Then you use SMART goals and a tool such as a balanced scorecard or the logical framework that you've learned in previous sessions to implement an effective strategy. What are SMART goals? Well, SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. If you're going to be effective, you need to have all 5 of these attributes in your goals for problem solving. So this is just an easy way to remember that for those of you that have not experienced it before. There's another thing you need to think about is, when is it time to change the mission, vision, and values of your organization? We discussed the importance of creating them, all of them, the mission, vision, and value statements, in collaboration with the leadership team and making sure that it is integrated with the leadership team. As the team changes or as business needs move the organization, you'll need to review and revise these statements. There is no specific amount of time when you would need to do this, but you need to do it periodically to make sure that you're keeping up with the organization and you're providing the support that they need. And then as your teammates and your organization grow and develop, you must adapt to those changing circumstances. One of the things that struck me is that in computers, we used to understand that it took a while for computers to load and reboot, sometimes when they were handling difficult issues. Now that they're faster and they have more storage, we tend to be less forgiving of those gaps, those delays, when things don't happen as quickly as we wish they would. Well, that's the same with when you get better. When your organization is providing a high level of service, the downside of that is that your customers will be less forgiving when you fall back to where you were. And so you have to keep improving, or in fact, you will be getting worse, as Tiger Woods said. If you're not getting better, you're getting worse. And then you may find that the big changes are not necessary, and you don't want to change just for the sake of change. We were required by the University of Texas Board of Regents to do a master plan review every 5 years. But what they didn't say was you have to go out and completely redo your master plan, because many master plans are well developed, and in fact, in a case like that, you want to stay with it to sort of guide the development of your campus or your institution. It's much like a community development plan in the private or in the municipal sector. And then go back to the plan, do, study, act cycle and do a fresh environmental scan from time to time, just to make sure that you're improving and that everything is still relevant that you've come up with for your organization. Customer service is at the heart of performance excellence or quality. As the Facility Management Handbook indicates, and this is what I mentioned you would see, the customer and the customer alone defines the quality of the product or service provided. That's why It is so important for facility managers to meet regularly with the customers and to find ways to assess how the customers feel about the services the facility manager and their team are providing. If you don't know how they feel, you're not going to be able to provide them the services that they need. And then another comment from the Facility Management Handbook is that managing customer service in facility management is really managing expectation. So if you're not able to perform a certain thing or you don't have a certain capability, you need to make sure that you manage the expectations of your customers so that they understand what you are capable of and what you can provide. Also from the Facility Management Handbook, they mentioned that there's a simple response card with 5 questions described on this slide here that can help you assess how the customer feels about your performance. 1, did we do what you wanted us to do? 2, did we do it well? 3, did we do it in a timely manner that was acceptable to you? Again, it's the customer and the customer alone who defines the quality of the product or service we provide. 4, did we look good? And did we clean up after ourselves? And looking good is not, are we handsome or ugly, that sort of thing. Is were our uniforms clean? Were we professional? Did we act in a professionally accountable way? That's important to customers. And then probably the biggest complaint I would get is that, oh yeah, the work got done, but they didn't clean up after themselves. And some customers, by the way, some of your clients will just let the debris from the drywall or whatever it is that is left behind, they will just let it sit there just to see if anyone will ever come back. And so it's important to make sure that you ask those questions and you'll get an answer from them. Did we clean up after ourselves? Well, if they're not happy about it, they will let you know, believe me. Number 5, did we check with you to ensure that you were happy? That's where you do that at the end, because many times when they will wait to see if someone comes back, they're really just upset that no one came to ask them if they were happy with the results. So you have to do that. There are many tips for defining what your key performance indicators are, and I found 3 good short videos that talk about key performance indicators and that would be valuable for you to watch. There's understanding top 5 tips for defining your key performance indicators, the difference between metrics, KPIs, and key results. This is important because you want to measure those things that are important to your organization and to your success. You can't measure everything. It doesn't provide any value if you're not solving an issue with it, or you're not showing that you're performing something effectively. And then another one on how to develop great key performance indicators. Good stuff for you to think about as you're working through your own process of trying to come up with key performance indicators. From the developing of great KPIs, there were something like, I think, 16 specific things that you should be doing. One is to define the strategic goal, and we talked about that. What are the strategic goals of the institution, and is the facilities organization integrated with those? Be clear about the audience. Who is that KPI intended to be provided to? Is it for leadership, like the dashboards that I've shown you? Or is it your own staff who are trying to make improvements within their organization? What questions are answered in terms of the performance metric? One example, one of the reasons I would track funding was to answer the question, do we have enough money to do this or to do that this year, or do we have to wait for next year? Another one is, are we getting better or are we getting worse? Are the facility condition indexes that I showed you, is our campus condition getting better or is it getting worse? In our case, sadly, most of the time it was getting worse because the funding was not improving. How will the indicator be used? You've heard the expression that figures don't lie, but sometimes liars can figure. Well, you have to be very clear about what the indicator is for and how it is being used and really how it's developed. Once everyone is in agreement on that, then you can move forward in a positive way. You need to name the indicator so that people understand what it is. We had that safety walk that I showed you. We walked the campus twice and multiple times since then because they did it on a regular basis. But the idea was, are we taking care of those things? And that was our safety walk indicator, or safety walk deficiencies. Where's the data coming from? What's the methodology for the data? How will it be measured? What is the target or the performance threshold? Indicators are not target. The targets are, where does that indicator get to, or where do you want it to get to? In our case, for preventive maintenance, we were trying to beat above 90% and above 80% for corrective maintenance. That's for schedule compliance. How often is the data being collected? How frequently? What is the reporting frequency? You may collect the data, but you may only report in a certain frequency. So you may collect daily preventive maintenance work that's been done, but you only report it on a monthly basis, for instance. Who's the responsible person to make sure that the data is collected, analyzed, and used? It's always nice if you can get a third party. We had our information technology technician would go and run the reports. He was a master with our computerized maintenance management system, CMMS system, and he would provide the reports, and then those would get translated again by another third party to make sure that we got an accurate result. Who's the responsible person to make sure it's collected, analyzed, and used? So the other thing is, who's going to take that and do something with it in a positive way? And what's the expiry or revision date? Is it still a valid KPI? Those have to be looked at from time to time to make sure that it's valuable to your organization. How much is it costing me? So that's another big question, are you spending too much money collecting this data? In some cases, you can spend more than it's worth, or you can have diminishing returns for getting even more data. And then how complete is the indicator? Is it valuable in the information that's provided? And then are there any unintended consequences of measuring that, and what are those? So there's a lot of things you look at, and I encourage you to look at the 12-minute KPI, Develop Great KPIs, because it gets you to think about what you need to do to assure that you're getting good key performance indicators so that you can continuously improve your organization.
AIA.
Are the lifeblood of business intelligence, and defining what yours are is the first important decision you'll need to make when starting your BI project. In this video, I'll be sharing some tips on how to choose the right KPIs for your business. Hey everyone, Adam here from Vitamin BI, bringing you business intelligence for beginners and beyond. On this channel, we look at all things BI, things like data analysis and visualization, as well as BI platforms and how to choose the right one for you. So if you're new here, think about subscribing. But before we get started, let's just remind ourselves exactly what KPIs are. KPI stands for Key Performance Indicator. They're metrics that help you measure a business's performance or success in achieving its objectives. Now, KPIs will vary based on the nature of the business activity, but they can be high level, like measuring the overall performance of a business, or focus more on specific aspects of a specific activity, like marketing, finance, or your website. So how do you define your KPIs? Some overall ones might come to mind fairly easily, like total revenue, total sales, that kind of thing. But what about the more specific ones? Well, like I said, it really does depend on your particular business activity and the data that you have available. But let me share with you some of my top tips for things to think about to help you get started. So my first tip is an exercise that you can try by imagining that your business has its very own personal assistant like Siri or Alexa. And this assistant has access to all of your business data and can answer any question you might have about how it's performing. So, what questions would you want to ask? What for you are your key performance indicators? Here are a few example questions. How much has our revenue grown this month? Obviously, that will be your revenue metrics, but then focused on a specific period of time compared with a previous period. How is our website performing? In this case, you'll need to define what KPIs define performance for you. It won't just be the number of visits it gets, because it could be that visitors aren't engaging with your site, or you might be getting some spam traffic. So you need to think about things like the average session length, the number of pages viewed per visit, and the bounce rate. When should I order more stock? Here, maybe measure a percentage of your stock capacity remaining side by side with a KPI showing the rate at which your stock is selling. How has our new promotion impacted sales? Here, you might need to compare sales for a period of time before and since the launch of the promotion to calculate the percentage difference. What social media posts create the most engagement? Here, you could compare different social media channels to see which ones give you the most reach and engagement, or maybe categorize your posts depending on their theme or content to see which ones perform better. So already you can see that just asking these questions, it gets you thinking about the data points that you'll need to answer them and focus in on the important KPIs. Quick tip number 2 is to consider different aggregators. Now, if you're not familiar with what an aggregator is, it's things like sum, average, minimum, and maximum. And these can be applied to your KPIs. So you don't always have to go for sum to add everything up and get a total value. You might want to consider applying different aggregators to different KPIs. For example, let's say you run a restaurant. You might want to know what the average spend per cover is, or the maximum number of covers in any given period. Which brings me to tip number 3, periodicity. By measuring KPIs over a specific period of time, it allows you to compare them with previous periods and see how things are trending and evolving. In a dashboard, you might often see a KPI that looks like this. Here we can see revenue for the past 30 days with a percentage of variation from the previous 30. The figure for the previous period isn't all that important, but seeing that there's a trend